investors. Welcome to another episode of Ritter On Real Estate, where I teach you how to passively invest like a pro. Today, my special guest is Ali Boone. Ali is an entrepreneur, real estate investor, author, and a real estate investing coach. Her company, Hipster Investments, managed to facilitate over 18 million in real estate transactions in its first 5 years of business. She's been a longtime writer for BiggerPockets. She's been featured in Motley Fool, Fox Business, Business Insider, Investopedia, and US News. And she recently authored a book, the Not Your How-To Guide to Real Estate Investing, Life Lessons for Hacking Your Mind Before You Hack Your Wallet. And I wanted to include this because I thought this was interesting. Her ultimate goal is to one day challenge Tim Ferriss to a lifestyle design duel. Fair enough.
I mean, you gotta have goals, right?
You gotta have goals. You gotta shoot big. So, Ali, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. So before we dig into everything, let people know a little bit about who you are and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so the short of it is, I grew up with the very standard Western civilization mindset of go to school, get good grades, get a secure job, retire when you're 65 kind of thing. And so I did that for a long time. Through grad school, I was flying airplanes, I was teaching, I was flight instructing while I was working on a master's degree in aerospace engineering. And I thought that whole picture, I was like, golden, that's job security. Like, this is great. And my family is there's a lot of aviators in my family. So it kind of followed suit. So I did that and I finished the master's degree. I got hired at what a lot of people would perceive to be the dream company, the dream job. And I'll never forget, I tell the story all the time, it was a fairly classified job. So I had to walk like a mile underground to get to my office. And so I trekked through this tunnel, going to my first big girl job. I've got business casual clothes on. I was like, oh man, I've made it. I get a real paycheck. And I turned the corner into what was going to become my cubicle. And in that moment, I froze and I just looked at this cubicle and, I had been flight instructing. My office was the sky. It was nature. It was beautiful. It was adventurous. And I'm looking at this drab gray cubicle and the thought in my head was, uh-oh, I knew right then, none of this was going to work. Like, I'm not a corporate person. I'm not a business casual person. None of this. It was just like, I'd just been in school for a very long time. And I was like, uh-oh. And so I did the job. I stuck with that career for 5 years and I did some really cool things in that job. I even took position transfers to make sure that, engineering wasn't for me. And sure enough, it was not. But that whole 5 years that I was in there, all I could think about was, how was I going to get out? And, I could fly airplanes. I had engineering background, but like, what am I actually going to do on a practical level to get out of corporate? And through that journey, I didn't know where it was going to land me. I was researching business, real estate investing, all the big players that seem to get people out of corporate. And I had subscribed to every newsletter under the sun because I did not want to do engineering stuff. I wanted to figure a way out. And I got this real estate investing opportunity, totally unrelated to what I do now, came in my inbox and I just kind of casually went for it. And I was thinking, while I'm still in corporate, I have a paycheck, might as well do something smart with my money. Let me get some real estate. So when I did that, I started meeting a lot of people in the industry. And really one thing led to another. Suddenly I was buying properties. Everyone wanted to know what I was buying. They're like, how are you doing that? And I kind of became this voice unexpectedly for the things I was working on. BiggerPockets picked me up as a writer. And it finally hit me, there's a career to be made out of this. So I started doing that before I left the engineering job, eventually jumped ship, quit the engineering job, which actually this year is my 10-year anniversary of jumping that ship, which is nice. Crazy in my mind. So for the last 10 years, I've primarily been working with turnkey rental properties. I help people buy them, find turnkey providers. We can dive more into turnkeys later if we want to, but really playing the turnkey role as far as the providers, the emotional support dog. There's a lot of new investors buying turnkeys. They're scared, they're fearful, they don't know what they don't know. And so I was doing that mostly. And over the last maybe 2 to 3 years, I've really started doing a lot of real estate investing coaching. And ironically, most of the people I end up doing coaching with are not turnkey people, because I've always been known for turnkeys. And it's been such a cool experience, because I later ended up getting another degree in psychology. And it's kind of like the perfect mesh for me of psychology and engineering, like the psychology of an investor kind of thing. So that's been a really fun kind of newer, different thing. I still love the turnkeys, but it's added, a little twist to it. I've done a lot of business consulting over the years. I love doing that also. And yeah, here we are, turnkeys and coaching.
Awesome. Well, that's a heck of a journey. I think it's it's an inspiring story to show that, just another example of how real estate can get you out of that job that you don't like or doesn't fit you. And we were talking before this, and you are just traveling everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think that's another cool thing. It gives you that freedom to be able to do that. You can work from anywhere. So
yeah, that's one of my, even it can be a part of real estate, but one of my favorite things is lifestyle design. That's really what we're working for. And, people say all the time, I want financial freedom. Is that really what you want? Because it's more about, in my opinion, I've never known anyone to actually just want the money for the money. What does financial freedom get you? It's time freedom, location freedom. People want to be retired now, and that's lifestyle design. So it's like, how do you bring real estate in to help you achieve kind of a pseudo retirement, or a full retirement for that matter, before you're 65 years old?
Yeah. And 100% agree with you. I think that the financial freedom is just that first step to the freedom to do everything else. Right.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Kind of why you pursue that path. And obviously real estate has been one of the kind of preferred methods to get out there. And, one thing that we were talking about, just as we were talking about your book and things beforehand, is just, why people find it so challenging when they get started. It's something, everybody buys their single family house. You kind of go through this process, but then when you buy a rental and you think about being a landlord and all the things that come into it, a lot of people, obviously people you're coaching, need help. So dive in a little bit to the psychology of an investor, and what is it? Yeah, kind of what does it take? What is the mindset? What does the mindset need to be? Maybe what are some maybe tips for folks? And then and then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, I was actually thinking the other day, just randomly, and it wasn't even about real estate specific, but I was really thinking back on my life, and I was looking at every single time I've had a challenge. And I was thinking about those, and I realized that the solution out of that challenge every single time was more mindset based than anything. Obviously, there can be some logistics and, why we have challenges in life and stuff, but it's always a mindset shift. And so same with real estate, is it can be confusing, it can be frustrating, but it's about a mindset shift. It's like, okay, let's take a step back and kind of unwind all this stuff. So my answer to your question about why I have seen that it's so challenging, and I was one of these people too, is a two-part answer. The first part, I think, has been around probably since the beginning of time. But one of the reasons I think it's so challenging is because there are so many options as a real estate investor, and none of us learn this in school. And so just from a simple navigation standpoint, it's like, wait, what do I do? We don't get a syllabus of here's step 1 through 7 for a couple of reasons. A, most people don't really make those, but also there's so many different strategy options. And within each of those strategy options, there's a million ways you can do each strategy. Like when you really put a big room full of investors together, it's very unlikely that any two of them are doing exactly the same thing, which on one hand is fantastic, because that means there really is something for everybody. But that does bring in a frustration component, because nobody spells all this out. Well, how am I supposed to, what strategy should I do? How should I do? I don't know. And so you Google how to be a real estate investor, people tell you how to do it. It's not really always that helpful. So it's just that not knowing. And that's probably been true since the beginning of time. Yeah. The newer part of this that I think causes a lot of frustration, and this is the one that really most people come to me coaching about, is you have all those options, you have all that stuff. Well, now you have a situation where there is so much information available to you about all of those things. it's absolutely overwhelming. And I can't tell you how many people call me and they're like, hey, I was really excited about getting started and I thought I was going to do this and da 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 da. But what's been happening is they've been hearing different things from a million different voices. Half the voices don't agree. They're on BiggerPockets, they're on other websites, and there's just all this information just being, shot at you. And I'm now calling it the overwhelmed epidemic. This is my own term when I think of it in my head, is there's an epidemic going on of just TMI, too much information. And so people are really having a hard time sifting through of like, okay, well, I have 157 different options. Now what? How do I go forward on that information? So it's really just kind of, you don't know what you don't know is part one. And part two is just sheer overwhelm is what I've seen with most people.
Yeah. So exactly like you said, there's a million ways to go about it.
Yep.
Right. And then each of those million ways to
Which
go
is
about
great.
it, there's,
Ooh.
yeah, there's like 1,000 articles about each way. Right.
Yep.
And so,
and half the articles say the other one's wrong. And you're like,
right. So how do you, if you're somebody who's trying to become a real estate investor, no matter what the strategy is at this point, you just know that maybe they're where you were, right? And they're like, I'm not happy with what I'm doing. I need to do something else. I know real estate has worked for people. How does somebody start to kind of sift through all this and figure out where, like, what's going to be a good fit?
Yeah. I think the best thing to do is to look at it like a process. Like when you start sifting, so to speak, you may not find that answer right away. I didn't know turnkeys were going to be my thing until about year 4.5. And if someone had talked to me about turnkeys before that, I've been like, no, that sounds stupid. Like nothing about that was even on my radar. It just kind of appeared. People are like, well, how'd you get into turnkeys? I'm like, well, they kind of fell in my lap. Although that sounds like I did no work for it, which is not accurate. But, when you start, you've got to think about it. Like you have this whole pool of information. The first step, what I tell people to do is just start clearing out the noise. Like if you want absolutely passive income, table all the flipping talk or the wholesaling talk, whatever doesn't fit into either what you want to be doing or what you think you should be doing to meet your goals. If anything does not apply, get rid of it. You've got to narrow that pool down. And really, if you look at it like it's a process, you start with a pool this big and you just keep narrowing it. So first step, get rid of all the stuff that absolutely is irrelevant. You don't have time or bandwidth to deal with that stuff. You can always go back to it later if you're like, maybe I do want to flip a property. Okay, cool. But for now, table it. So shrink your pool. And then once you're kind of like, what you're talking about, passive income. Okay, maybe now we're thinking about turnkeys or syndications or investing in a REIT or whatever whatever the options are. It's like, okay, I've narrowed myself down to 4 passive options. Okay, well, now let's start looking at each one of those. And as you go further into each one might make sense. You might be kind of excited about it and one may not. And you're like, get rid of it. And so you're continuing just to shrink and shrink and shrink. It's like a funnel. And you're eventually going to come to something that it's of interest and it fits your goals. Maybe it's not your forever, maybe it is, and start there. And so then once you have your strategies, like, you know what, cool, I'm going to try syndications, end of story. And when you make that declaration, just focus on syndications. Again, you can change later. You can do whatever you want later. But the way that I look at it is most people are going wide. And as long as you're going wide and you're learning a little about a lot, you're not really going to gain traction. In order to gain traction, you've got to go deeper. So it's like, shrink the pool. Okay, I want to do syndications. Now let's go deeper with syndications. And that's where that traction is going to build of, oh, okay, I'm feeling pretty good about this. And so because in the beginning, you don't know what you don't know. You may not know what your strategy is going to be. You may not know anything. When I started, I knew zero. I knew how to fly an airplane, and that was absolutely irrelevant to getting me out of corporate or real estate. I didn't even know I was going to do real estate. I first narrowed it down, business and real estate. Okay, well, now I have 2 things to look at. Eventually, I wasn't gaining traction on either. So it's like, I got to pick one of these. So boom, real estate. Okay, now what am I doing? So again, thinking deeper rather than wider, because you've got to do something that gets you traction. You can change course later, but you've got to start somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's great advice. As you were thinking about this, I was thinking, okay, like what are those variables as you kind of break that down? I was thinking about
Mhm.
my own journey because uh, similarly, I tried a bunch of different things at the
Yeah.
beginning. So I started out with note investing and
Mhm.
building up a portfolio of notes, which is on the debt side, right? Well, that led me to see a couple examples where the houses that I had the loans on, doubled in value, and those people sold them and
Mhm.
doubled their money. I said, okay, well, I need to get on the equity side. I need to start buying these assets. Led to kind of two things at the same time: passively investing to learn about apartments, but also picking up some singles and duplexes
Mhm.
and things, and starting to do some flips and build up a rental portfolio. And so, I mean, I did 4 different things, I
Mhm.
think, as I think about it, before I landed on apartment syndications and actually leading those syndications, which is what I do now. That's the only thing I do now. But yeah,
Mhm.
it was a winding path to get there. It took about,
Yep.
that's probably a 4-year path, and learned a lot along the way. But yeah, I think you figure out what you like and what you don't. But I was
Mhm.
so I'm trying to think about these like variables. And I think starting with active versus passive makes a ton of sense, because
Yeah.
that like cuts everything in half right
Yep.
away. And then you start to think about, like I was thinking about, okay, debt versus equity, but really I think it's about like
Mhm.
risk tolerance.
Yeah,
And then
for
also at
sure.
the same time, like returns you're expecting. So like balancing that risk for returns, like debt,
Mhm.
typically safer as long as you're doing it right, versus equity, but there's more upside there. So you got to balance how
Yep.
risk adverse are you, right? And
Yep.
maybe
Exactly.
that's kind of a next layer to cut out some other things.
Absolutely.
And then I don't know, that was kind of as far as I got, but I feel like this framework, you kind of
Well,
build
but
it out.
I think what you're saying, you said really two very profound things in there that I think is number one, the way you described your path is that it, like as you were describing it, felt very organic to me. And that's how I didn't choose turnkeys. I somehow just organically followed kind of what was presenting itself, and I explored different things. And I'm like, no, I don't really like that thing. And it was that winding path that you're describing. And
Hmm.
like you said, you did quite a few different things. And it's not that people can only do one thing, choose one thing, and, whatever. That's just to help with the overwhelm. But,
Yeah.
if you try a note and then you're like, okay, cool, got my feet with that, I wonder if I do this. Okay, maybe I do a little bit of that. And it's that winding path that you described, which I think is absolutely very valuable for everyone. And then the risk adverse thing speaks to, because we can all kind of know if we want like active or passive income. What are we wanting to do? What are we wanting to achieve? But
Hmm.
so much of this equation, and what I really try to get people to look at, and it's why I ended up with turnkeys, is looking at themselves. Because I feel like real estate investing is this industry where it's more of an outbound kind of thing. It's like looking at everything around us. You don't think about bringing in
Yeah.
personality and emotions, and people are like, no, leave your feelings out of it. Well, okay, in some context, yes, but the risk aversion, you need to be honest with yourself. And I'm a big fan of leveraging, but I also get that some people will absolutely lose sleep if they have any debt, good debt or bad debt.
Yeah.
And so in that case, it's like, as long as you're being honest with yourself of like, risk isn't my thing. Nope. Mm-mm. Okay, great. Now that's going to help you whittle down even further. Or if you're like, I love risk, I love an adrenaline shot. Okay, well, now that can steer you that way. So, risk aversion, your personal strengths, your skills, your resources. Some people just may not have the
Yeah.
resources that are necessary. Looking at yourself in order to help you determine that. So, I think exactly what you said is phenomenal.
Yeah, I think the strengths is another one that yeah, you just made me think about, because you think about well, strengths, but also like what you like to do. Because you could
Yeah.
say, man, this guy over here is making a ton of money wholesaling, but you don't like to talk to people on the phone,
Hmm.
or you're just
Yep.
introverted. Like that's not going to be a good fit for
Yeah.
you. That's going to be very uncomfortable. It's not going to be
Yeah.
something you're going to enjoy.
And
So
that, yeah, that's why that blanket statement about you should start with wholesaling. Well, some people maybe should. There are some people who absolutely should not. Like we're
Yeah.
trying to keep them in the industry. But yeah, it's a personality, like yeah, and you said something really key there that I think is you said strengths and also finding your, following your joy. People ask me a lot of times, well, I'm not really clear on what my strengths are. I don't think I could have told you what my strengths were before I got into it either. So how do I find my strengths? Well, if you don't already know what they are, or you don't have kind of a hint of them, start just by following your joy, because it's pretty
Mhm.
rare that you are going to be really joyful about something you're terrible at. Like those things, you can obviously try things that you're hating and you're, trying to challenge yourself or whatever, or maybe you're really good at something, but you're not really finding a lot of joy in it. So there's variations to that. But
Yeah.
typically joy and strength go hand in hand, because I feel a million times more joyful when I'm doing something I'm good at than this is why I don't flip houses. This is why I don't wholesale. The thought of both of those makes me want to ram my head into a piece of drywall. Truly. Like no, thank you.
Well, that's one way to demo it.
Yeah. And that's probably how I would do it, actually. And, also too, it's not to say I'll never flip a property. Sure, I might want to expand later. But in terms of that honing in on, something that's really going to carry you forward, follow the joy, if nothing else. Because also
Yeah.
too, I try and tell people, yes, real estate investing is about the money. Yes, it's about finances and security and all sorts of stuff. But there are plenty of ways to be having fun while you're doing it. And trust me, real estate can get so challenging sometimes. If you're not like at the core enjoying what you're doing, those challenges will wipe you out, because it's like, what am I fighting for kind of thing. But when you really are enjoying what you're doing, that will ultimately carry you way further than forcing something that is kind of just against your natural grain.
Yeah. I think that's really insightful. And there's the idea too that like, everything's more difficult when you start, but
Yeah.
I think, and you've got to learn how to do it. But I think your point is around kind of that deeper why, or like
Yeah.
that, that alignment of, if you're just fighting because you think this is going to be the thing that's going to make me the most money,
I
but you
should
just
wholesale.
hate doing it, then you're going to get burnt out because you only
Yeah.
have so much willpower, right? You can
Yep.
only power through for so long.
Yeah.
And there was a concept I learned not too long ago. I think it's a Tony Robbins concept, but it's kind of these different classes of human experience.
Hmm.
And it talks about a second class human experience is something where you don't really enjoy it, but it's good for you. It's
Yeah.
good for people around you, and it's good for everybody
Yeah.
essentially. And a first class human experience is all those things. It's good for all those things, but you also enjoy it.
Yeah.
That's like the highest achievement. And
Hmm.
the only reason I bring that up is because the thing that I thought about in learning that, and there's levels 3 and 4, but we'll stay away from those. You don't want to be there. Is like, even if it's something that's good for you and maybe you don't enjoy it. I mean, those second class things can become first class things
Yeah.
as you become good at them,
Yeah.
right? So there's that balance of like, you can't, like, I guess what I don't want people to hear is it should be easy from the start, because it's definitely
Right.
not.
No.
But there's a broader alignment, I think, with your goals and mission, but everything's difficult at the start, and you got to take
Yep.
that second class experience, work hard, and turn that into a first class experience, and then that's where I think your joy is, right?
Yeah. And I think that's why it's so important to find that joy and to do things that you're at least to some degree enjoying. And what, if there's a big difference between if you're trying to leave corporate and make a career path out of this, you might want to be a little more diligent about making sure there's some level of joy involved. But like, let's say you're perfectly happy working 9 to 5 and you're just trying to add some extra financial support for your family. That could easily be a second class experience. You don't have to love it. You just want to
Mhm.
provide for your family kind of thing. But what it makes me think of, or in terms of it not being easy, that's so true. And that's why I think it is important to find your joy, because when it's not easy, that joy and that deeper why is going to be what carries you through. And what it makes me think of is when I left corporate, before that, I was a total control freak. I flew airplanes. I was an engineer. There was nothing in my life that I couldn't control. Like if I needed to make something happen, I just made it. I was trained to make things happen. Well, guess what happens when you jump the corporate ship and you're now an entrepreneur? you can't really make anything happen. I couldn't make people buy property. So I felt like I was in a washing machine. I was like, oh, like this was exhausting. And so my first year of entrepreneurship was a lot of those lessons, and they were hard lessons. I was also making no money. I didn't know when my next rent payment was coming. I didn't know if I was going to pay for groceries. And at one point, a few months into this, I'm just like, oh, this is terrible. And my parents actually asked me, they said, given all of this going on, would you ever think about going back to corporate? And I said, nope, I will sooner be homeless on the beach. And it made me realize that I had never been more stressed, but I had also never been happier. And that level of stress of becoming an entrepreneur you're going to be stressed no matter what you're doing. Things are going to be hard no matter what you're doing. So in my version of this, I now had a different kind of stress than the stress I endured when I was at corporate. And I would much prefer the entrepreneur stress. I could make my own schedule. I could do all these things. So was it easy? Heck no, like not even a little bit, but it was that deeper why and that interest. I was interested in what I was doing, and therefore I was able to overcome the stress. So, if I had jumped ship and done something I hated, I probably would have been back at my corporate job within about 6 months.
Yeah. And I think because it aligned with your broader values, right? You started to understand what your values were, and you were aligned with them. And so therefore you were able to persevere.
Yep.
And so something in your book that I think this is just an awesome segue. You mentioned in your book a chapter about the three currencies, and I think you were starting to tap into that, talking about you didn't have any money, but you had a heck of a lot of time, and you were happier than you ever were, right? So talk about what the three currencies are.
It's my favorite. I don't remember where in my journey this kind of hit me, or when I started seeing it like this, but there was a point along the lines where I decided for myself that there were really three true currencies. Number one, money. We all know that one. Number two, time. And I feel like more and more in recent years, people are starting to acknowledge time as a currency of like, I don't want to trade my time for money or trade my time for whatever. So they are talking about it in the form of being a currency, whether they know it or not. And the third one, which is my personal favorite, is sanity. And so if you look at the three true currencies, money, time, and sanity, anything you do in life, if you're going to get something, you're going to pay for that thing in one or more of those currencies. Maybe you just straight up pay money for it. You get it. Cool. You saved your time and sanity. Like turnkeys for me, I'm so big about my sanity. If I were to flip a house, that I would pay for that in my sanity. Yeah, maybe I'd make a little more money flipping houses, but then I'm also paying in sanity and time, most likely.
Time, yeah.
Yeah. And so there was this point where as an entrepreneur and as an investor, everything I did, I weighed it in terms of those. And I think I give the example of a book. Think about hiring a housekeeper for your house. Some people are like, well, I don't want to spend $100 like when I could clean it myself. Okay, well, if the house cleaner does it in 2 hours and you spend $100 and it would take you 5 hours to do the same thing, are you actually, yeah, you're saving $100, but didn't you just pay in time and sanity? And so those are harder to measure a little bit, but I literally, I weigh those out for everything I do. And I think, which, if I pay more, will I preserve my sanity? Because oftentimes you have to pay more money to keep your sanity and your time. And some people are all about, I just want to pay, I don't want to pay the money. Okay, well, cool. If you want to pay in your time and sanity, cool. And also too, what takes away my sanity may give someone else sanity. Some people love flipping properties. That may bring them joy. I pay and joy for that kind of thing. So, again, looking back at yourself of which of those three is most important to you. There's a big difference between a single young person who's getting started as an investor and, they have time to make mistakes. Their risk aversion, or they have more tolerance for risk, all sorts of things, versus let's say there's a dad who has a family of 5 and he's working a 9-to-5 job. He doesn't really have time or sanity to donate. The young young buck kid might have those things to donate or pay in. So it's different for everybody. But when you start to look at those three things, and as you're kind of narrowing that pool, is like, how am I paying for this? Like turnkey rental properties are the perfect example. Yeah, you're going to pay more for a turnkey rental property than you are a BRRRR or a rehab value add property, and your returns are going to be slightly lower. But guess what? I don't spend on turnkey. Well, actually, I spend a lot of sanity on turnkeys just because I work with them. But buying a turnkey property, I get to save all of my time and sanity. So the people are like, well, you're paying market value, you're not maxing out your returns. I'm also sitting at the beach every day. So,
Yeah. I mean, no, I love that. It really speaks to me as well because, I have, so I'm very active. I buy apartment buildings, but I love buying apartment buildings. I think it's a lot of fun. I like the whole process. I like working with investors and bringing them in. So it brings me a lot of joy. But I talk to a lot of people that want to become apartment syndicators. And, the piece of advice I try to give them is directly in the lines with these different currencies. And I just love the concept that you're going to pay for it in some way. It may not be with money, but it might be with time, and it might be your sanity. The conversation I have with a lot of people is because they say, oh yeah, I want to make a lot of money, right? You be a syndicator, you can make a lot of money. You can. But my warning is, honestly, the amount that, because I started out 4 years as a passive investor before I bought my first apartment. And the amount of returns you can get as a passive investor versus an active, I mean, the spread is
Huge.
not that wide. So you have to love doing it. Like the juice isn't worth the squeeze if it's not something that you enjoy and want to spend your time. Yeah, I don't know where that came from, but
I'm like, hey,
spend your time doing it. Because I mean, you can make, I get the same thing. The reason I'm relating it is because it sounds like the same thing for you in turnkeys, right? Yeah. You can still make better than the stock market, better than most other places.
Yep.
But you can spend your time on the beach, or you can spend your time with the family or whatever else. And so I still think it's an awesome thing to do. And I think it's the right thing for people that really just don't love real estate.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's kind of my overall message. I think it just related a lot to, I feel like a lot of conversations I have when, I just, like it takes a lot of work.
Yeah. And poor wholesaling. I'm really tearing it up today, and wholesaling can be absolutely great. But, again, I'll hear the dad of 5 with a full-time job saying, I'm going to start wholesaling. Really? When? And he's not in it for real estate, he's in it for the returns. Okay, well, it's that trade-off. And yeah, it's, people knock turnkeys all day long, and they're like, you could make so much more money if you do it yourself. Well, again, I'm laying on the beach and I'm in the mountains for 6 weeks to ski because I want to. I can't do that if I'm, so for me, sanity is number 1, time is number 2, money is number 3. I'd rather pay more and keep the other 2. Other people may be very different, but yeah, again, it's that look inside, because everyone's answers can be different. And even within one strategy, let's say you're going to be a syndicator or whatever, you still want to keep looking at that balance, because there's different ways to do different things. If you wanted passive income and now you're working 90 hours a week and exhausted, we might want to tweak something, kind of thing. So it's a constant. Right. It's not just look at it one time while you're narrowing that pool. It's look at it all the time. Is there a way I could better be doing this where I'm spending more of this and less of that, kind of thing?
Yeah. It's all about that balance. And I think it's a great way to think about it, honestly. And so, yeah, thanks.
And honesty. It's about balance, but also honesty. Cause that's what I see a lot of people doing is like, no, I'll be fine flipping properties. No, I'll do this. I'm like, you gotta, I tell people all the time, one of my favorite things since being an entrepreneur, because I make my own schedule, I work when I want to, from wherever I want to. My absolute number 1 joy in life since becoming an entrepreneur is sleeping in. Well, most people hear sleeping in and they're like, wow, lazy. Like, it's not a good reputation to have, but I'm going to be honest about it. It brings me a lot of joy. And, I've got to be willing to own that. And so, you got to be willing to own your skills or lack thereof, or your interests. Maybe you're interested in something really weird. Cool. go with it, but you got to be willing to own it too. Because otherwise you're just tricking yourself and you're not helping your path.
Yeah, I love that. Just be honest with yourself and be who you are. I think that's a great message. I think that's a great place to transition into my keys to success round.
Oh,
I got 4 questions I want to ask you.
I'm like, oh, stretch.
There you
Ready.
go. I trust me, it won't be too painful. The first one is, and this is great because you're a turnkey investor. So if you were going to invest your money with someone else and you can only ask them one question, what would that one question be?
One question is torture. How much money have you made? That would just be my starting question, but you got to start somewhere. Because if you've made no money and you're about to rope me into doing this, okay.
That's a good one. What are you most proud of in your career?
I feel like I should say taking the risks that I have, but the risks have never really bothered me. I'd say my biggest, my most proud thing is just figuring out my career and my work and what I do in such a way that it allows me to live my dream life. I feel like I'm retired, even though I work all the time. I can be where I want, when I want, all that kind of stuff. And just my willingness to be open to knowing that that's possible and then to making it happen. And actually, maybe my proudest moment is continuing to survive it, because it's very stressful sometimes. And there's been many times I want to throw in the towel and I'm like, nope, just keep going. And because I am, I'm still doing it. So that, I guess I should be pretty proud of.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to be proud of there. I think just that you took the action, right,
Mhm.
to get yourself out of a situation that you weren't happy in. I mean, I think there's so many people that just stay stuck there
Yeah.
for their whole lives, because they were afraid to take that step. So I think there's
Yeah.
a lot to be proud of. What's a book that everybody should read?
Well, I have a very biased answer to this one. I heard about this amazing book called Not Your How-To Guide to Real Estate Investing, Life Lessons on Hacking Your Mind Before You Hack Your Wallet. I hear it's amazing for investor mindset. I heard the author's pretty cool too.
Yeah, maybe we should check that one out. And the last, just shilling shamelessly.
Shameless promotion. Again, you got to own it.
Yeah, there you go. And lastly, and maybe this is the answer, maybe that was the answer. What is your number one key to success?
Actually, I have a quote. The Three True Currencies comes in a close second to this because I really do think that's so important to get where you want to go. But my number one quote that I have lived by since the time I set out on this journey, and I nearly consider it every single day about something, real estate and otherwise, is don't take advice from someone. I got too excited. Don't take advice from someone you wouldn't trade shoes with. And I think about that all the time. I have some friends and family and all that. I love them dearly, but I don't want to be in their shoes in certain regards. So I'm probably not going to take advice from them in that aspect. Maybe I will from another one. As you're sifting through all this overwhelm and everyone on the online, it just sounded 85. I got too excited about this whole quote and I can't even talk. People are telling you all the time, you should be doing this, you shouldn't be doing that. Definitely do this, don't do that. It's so helpful for me to look at the person of who's giving me advice and consider, would I trade shoes with that person? If I would, I'll consider their advice more strongly. If I wouldn't, thank you, but I may keep going. And that's how I got my start, is I met somebody who was living the lifestyle design that I wanted. And I thought, this guy seems to know what he's doing. Every single thing he ever told me, I listened to it because I wanted to trade shoes with him. I have not listened to dudes sitting behind desks 90 hours a week wearing suits. I'm not trying to get there, so that's been a really helpful, and I would almost say number one, because even in that beginning phase, I was reading a lot of Robert Kiyosaki books. I would trade shoes with him over Dave Ramsey. Who am I going to listen to and who do I want to keep learning from? And those are the people that I would trade shoes with.
Yeah, that's great advice. I love that. It's a great quote. So Ali, now that we're wrapping things up, you've shared a ton with us. You've got a lot to give. If people want to learn more about what you're doing, your book, your coaching, all that you have going on, how do they reach you?
So I actually set up a link just for your folks. So my company's name is Hipster Investments. So if you go to hipsterinvestments.com / let me make sure I'm actually saying it right. It's just /Ritter. There will be an option on there to download a digital copy of my book for free. You know, that one I shamelessly promoted earlier. You can get a free copy of it digitally. There's a link for the Amazon if you're like me and you have to hold a book in your hands. But also with that is my contact information about coaching, all that kind of stuff. So if nothing else, go to the link, get the free book.
Awesome. Well, appreciate that. And we'll make sure that that's linked in the show notes so everybody can grab it.
Awesome.
Ali Boone, thank you so much for coming on today. I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having me.